start the recording and share my screen. So I'd like to acknowledge that I am joining you from the land of the people of the Kulin Nations, who are the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people, who are the ongoing custodians of these lands and who are currently involved in treaty negotiations. They never ceded sovereignty, and I am watching with great interest to see how treaty negotiations are going. I pay my respects to these communities through my research and teaching. And I try to make sure that our teaching and learning is as applicable to Indigenous students as to non-Indigenous students. So we're going to have a little tiny recap of topic 3 before we talk about the different approaches to resolving ethical dilemmas. And then we're going to apply those to some common ethical challenges. It relates in particular to 2 of the learning outcomes for the unit. The first is to look at some of the reasons that people end up excluded from participating in education and social activities, and evidence about the basis of that inclusion. What I want you to be able to do at the end of all of this is know the different approaches that you can draw on when you face these in your work, and apply those approaches to the dilemmas that you face and experience at work. Topic 3. Topic 3, I asked you to think about, we were still talking at that very big abstract level. If we are trying to move to a human rights-based education system, what does that ask of governments? What does that ask of systems? And what does that ask of schools? So let's stop there. I might stop sharing. What have people learned about what is being asked of governments and systems? What surprised you, horrified you, delighted you? What have you taken away so far about that big system level kind of learning that we've been doing? Yes, Stacey.
I didn't realise that from the top down, it was a funding issue, that we're still funding both pathways of segregated schools and mainstream schools, and still celebrating about the development of special schools and things like that in Victoria. So, I mean, while teachers are trying to be more inclusive from the ground up, the funding from the top down is kind of still pushing it in these 2 directions.
I was thinking about that the same as you, Stacey, just this week, and I was thinking I feel really complicated about it. So we knew at the end of last year, the state government here in Victoria announced a huge spend. And some of that's gone into the disability inclusion funding rollout, and some of it's gone into bricks and mortar. And every single special school in the state has received a pretty significant allocation of funds. And, you know, I visit those schools and I see how greatly in need they are. You know, some of the most disadvantaged, well, really and truly, the most disadvantaged kids in our system, a good proportion of those attend those schools. And it actually pleases me to know that they're going to have better facilities. I've seen poorly constructed ramps, toilets that haven't been upgraded for decades. I'm sure that people working in, I'm sure Bronwyn, Robert, others, you could tell me all of the good work that money's going to go on at your schools. And even if the federal government said today, you know what, we're going to make this happen, let's start doing this, it's going to be 10 years or so before that becomes a reality. And those kids need good facilities, just like every kid needs good facilities. So I do feel really complicated because I know that that money is going to make safer, better facilities for vulnerable kids. But I also know that investing that huge spend is going to delay the decision to desegregate our system as well. And I suppose I just wanted to share how complicated I think that is, because we need the schools to be safe, but we also need every kid to have their human rights upheld. Adrian, you've got a question, a comment. Hang on, you're muted.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted myself. Thank you. I was just saying, I I'm got a bit of an extension of what you're just talking about just then, because I work very closely with the Wodonga Special School in Belvoir. We have a federation of schools where we do a lot of work together, and we try to do a lot of transitioning from kids from special school into our middle school situation. That school is pretty much, it's only about 3 years old. It's got some beautiful facilities. It's a very good school. I think the teachers there are very dedicated and very supportive. I just feel in schools like that, the money probably could be better spent on the middle school that we're at to support the kids better in a mainstream setting, to create the facilities and the environment, the safe spaces. Some of the kids are kind of like picked at when they come into school because they're not used to a mainstream school setting. They don't have the social skills. They don't have the facilities like the swings and the playground equipment that they're used to, and that a lot of the school kids at their age actually love doing. So just having some of those facilities to enable inclusion, I think is going to be better off, because as I said, that school is beautiful. It's very well established. They're going to use the money well. I'm no doubt of that, but I just feel, yeah, where is inclusion?
Yeah, it makes it hard. I agree. I really feel, I felt hugely complicated when I heard it. I gasped when I heard the sum, and I thought, if I were looking for an enrolment for my child for next year, this would, we don't offer parents the ability to freely choose a segregated education for their kid if they can't access speeches, accessible toilets, you know, a safe perimeter, you know what I mean? All of the things. Yeah, felt very complicated about it. Okay, so funding. We've talked about funding. That's one of, and it's an almost insoluble problem as the system stands at the moment. What are some of the other big takeaways that people have learned over the last 3 topics? Or anything that's lingering for you as a question? Yes, Christy.
I suppose for me, I took away, and especially reading the section of the general comment 4, the idea of teacher education and kind of educating the educators on inclusive policy, on different learning styles, learning requirements. And it's a matter of not just changing the system to educate forward and educate new teachers and embed inclusive practices into new teaching, but it's about educating the teachers who are well established and who have been there for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, who have specific teaching learning styles, who might not be aware or understand student learning styles, who have never heard of or understand inclusive education. So at that kind of level, there needs to be almost an overhaul of, or how do we teach teachers, essentially. So, you know, that then comes down to, I think, again, at a systemic level, you know, how do we take the pressure off teachers so they can have that professional development and that professional learning, and how can we, you know, give them the time and the capacity to, you know, and to grow their own knowledge of what inclusion is.
It's a great point, and I would add 2 things onto it. How do we quality assure the professional learning we do offer them? Because, hands up who's been to some useless teacher PD in their time. And those are hours you'll never get back. And currently the accreditation system for professional learning is the same as it is for initial teacher education. It's the professional standards for teachers. And I'm just going to put it out there and say they are not fit for purpose. They are not. They're better than nothing. You know, we used to have state-based things that were really not commensurate with each other, and, you know, it wasn't ideal, but they're not clear and strong enough. Anything could be enacted in their name. Now, those are used to accredit initial teacher education. If you wanted to become a university tomorrow and provide initial teacher education, they would look at, so if you were offering a bachelor or a master's, they'd look at the sequence of subjects you'd offer over those 4 years or those 2 years, and you'd have to present it to them mapped against the standards. That's how it's accredited. And you get the rubber stamp to go ahead if they see the standards taught, practiced, and assessed in those units. But if they're not specific enough, then anything can be enacted in its name. So the problem, I think, is articulating clearer standards. But we all know that that means more administration and more regulation. Hands up who's got too high an administrative burden in their lives right now. So it's a double-edged sword. If you tighten that, if you know what I mean, if you think about this as a system made of springs and cogs, if you tighten that up, you increase the burden there. The same goes for the providers of professional learning. There's some great stuff out there. There's some really fabulous stuff out there, but that's not reflected in the accreditation system. So, Christy, that's what frustrates me. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about was the standards. The second is that there are separate standards for leaders. Did you know that the standards for principals do not mention the word disability? Not mentioned, it's not there. Oh, Chelsea, I wish I'd had a screenshot of your face. So yeah, I think that the people that get promoted into school leadership are people who are experienced teachers, as it should be, you know what I mean? You do need to understand how the system works. But at the same time, they're people who thrived under the old system. They're people who benefited under the old system. And many teachers who began teaching in a really highly segregated system, you know, where kids with disabilities were not welcome at their local schools really ever by policy. Many kids weren't in school at all. So if you did your training during that period, then, and some of them have embraced change, run fabulous schools. I can rattle off some schools where I know there are principals like that working, but not all of them did. So we need the same preparation of principals and professional learning for principals to reflect what we're asking teachers to do. I asked a principal in an interview a number of years ago to define differentiation for me. And he said, oh, well, it's been explained to me that it's meeting each kid at their point of need, but I wouldn't know how to do that, so I'm not going to ask my teachers to. And I, you know, when you interview people, you have to keep a poker face and say, tell me more about that. You know, you can't judge them hard, but I did, because I thought I'd also interviewed as teachers, and they were guns, and they were doing beautiful work in the name of differentiation. And so I thought at the time, we need our principals to be brought along here. We can't do this without them. So, funding models, preparation of teachers, professional learning for teachers. Any other big takeaways? Adrian, is your hand up again?
Yeah, it is up again. One of my biggest takeaways is just the concept of I guess I've probably been a little bit ignorant about the policies and all that type of stuff that the governments do face, and like the neoliberalism that's been happening quite heavily in New Zealand. And I guess I've been now really reflecting on how much that's become ingrained into teaching. Like, we constantly talk about students as outcomes, and it's all very much a business-like model. Just come back from a conference from the Wodonga Federation of 550 teachers, and they're all very much paraphrasing, you know, we're a business, our core business is education. The concept of standardized testings are still coming up. And I guess we just kind of like really need to start chipping away at that kind of mentality and that thought process, which I guess starts at the first chip, really, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does.
And also the whole concept where there's so many of my colleagues that have this ideology that the government schools isn't good enough for their kids, and they're all in independent private schools. So I guess I just find that's really interesting how you can tackle that push for inclusion, but still advocating separation with your own children. So
that's an interesting point that you raise. I'm just finishing an article that I'm writing at the moment, and one of the neoliberal policies that's really affected all this is choice. And it's in fact, a colleague came to me this week and they sent me a video of a special school in Wales and said, what do you know, that I felt like they were trolling me. They sent me this video of a special school, and the kids looked like they were having a lovely time. There was lots of rock climbing. It was a sort of slick promotional video. And there was, you know, a kid who was clearly in a hospital bed, and there was somebody patting them on the chest and looking lovingly at their face. And it looked really nice, but I didn't see any education going on. I said to her, look, you know, it looks nice, but I'm not seeing any education. And they've said there's minimal access to the curriculum. She said, oh, well, the parents seem really happy, they should be allowed to choose it. And then gave me a long diatribe about how choice is the basis of democracy. And I wrote back and said, no, one person, one vote is the basis of democracy. Choice is not the basis of democracy. Public education is not synonymous with democracy. And I agree with you. At what point did we stop saying we want an education system that provides the best education to all kids? And by all means, go and seek an education in a different faith, or, do you know what I mean? That we have a system that's flexible enough to permit that. But at what point did we say it was a government's obligation to fund it? And that, I think, is the question. And I've heard a number of parents say, but I'm entitled to choose a segregated education for my child. I think they're safer there. I really worry about their safety. And I said, you're entitled to it, but I'm not sure that governments are obliged to fund it for you. And I would argue that that would be better spent, as Robert, I think, said, somebody, sorry, the tiles keep moving around. If we pour all our money into making a small number of students safe in a small number of schools, we don't have one of those schools in every community. You know what I mean? People live in, sorry, Adrian, was it? Thanks, Robert. We don't have a safe special school in every community. And we don't have a quality education happening in every special school. So do we want to invest our time and resources into changing that? Or do we want to invest our time and resources into making every school one where every kid can access a quality education? Because we can't do both. So I think choice is the other neoliberal policy that's undermining this at the moment. And I don't know a government that's going to be brave enough to say, we're getting rid of choice. We're taking away your choices. Here's a vote winner, vote for me. I don't see it happening. So I don't know how we untangle that ball of wool. And I don't know how we protect parents' rights to choose while shifting that funding model. So, all right, so the other thing that I wanted to ask you in relation to all of that was, so what is the role of teachers? And we had some really fabulous comments on Moodle about this. I know there are some responses that I haven't got to and answered yet. Anybody got any questions or comments about the role of teachers in all of this? Robert.
I think at a classroom level, I think the role of teachers is to go in with the mindset that every child is A, deserving of an education, but also B, is educatable. I'm sorry that my pronunciation is probably not great on that word, but I think that's, I don't know about anyone else here, but I know over my teaching career, I've heard comments from well-meaning teachers who genuinely, in their heart of hearts, believed that their school could not support the needs of a child with a disability. And I think, yeah, I'll pass to you, Jessica.
Yeah, just on that, Robert, I think it comes down to that marginalisation as well. So people have good intentions, and I was reading this study when we we're doing what we need to do for our assessment, and I saw that the parents of kids without disability are more for inclusion than parents with disability. So it was really, really interesting to see that as well. And they genuinely know and know that teachers are trying to do their best, but I think it's that whole debate of ableism. Like it's there, and it's how do we change it? And I think looking at all the things that, like that paper you wrote, Kate, with the multi-tiered structured support, I think that's the way to start the shift, particularly when we've got the special schools getting funded. And again, Bronwyn and everyone that works said, you guys do an amazing job. It's nothing against that at all, but it's a system will change. It's a matter of when, and it's how can we do it on the floor in the mainstream settings in a supportive way to try and stop that ableism from happening.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I was talking to one of the inclusion outreach coaches. You know, those of you here in Victoria in the public system, those are new coaches that exist at the system level that schools will be able to pull in and ask for assistance. So if you've had a facilitator help you with the DIP process, and you know it's been decided that strategy A is going to be implemented for this kid, and the school says we've never done strategy A before, you can have a coach come in. And she was doing some PD, and so all the coaches are actually located in the special schools, so that's where their desks are. And so there she was doing some PD. And she was with two principals from a local mainstream area, and they made some comment. She said something about you know, the kids in the special school system not being reported to the government in the A to E grades. And they said, but it doesn't matter, those kids can't really learn. And she just went really quiet and thought, reflected on how they had said it to her as if it was a perfectly okay thing to say. They genuinely believed it. They had, no idea the shock that she was feeling inside. And there she was in a breakout room in a Zoom training thinking, I don't think I can change this in the 5 minutes I've got for the activity limit. I don't think I can fix that right there. And she said, just lamely, yes, they can, and they do, they do learn. Anyway, and then her breakout session was ended. But it was a very telling comment that view remains. And Robert, go back to your point, it takes every teacher looking at every kid in their classroom and saying, you are capable of learning and I am capable of teaching you. I agree, that's sits at the basis of it all. Yes, Stacey.
I was just thinking about a similar comment, well, from a parent. I had a PSG last term where the mum said that she just cries for a full week after getting every report because her son is marked against the standards, which he obviously isn't achieving. And she said, but I really like when we have these meetings about his individual learning plan because I get to actually see where his progress is and where he's learning. And our school at the moment don't do modified reports, which horrified my new boss, but it's something that we're going to work towards. But it was a really sad reflection from a parent that she said, I get my husband to read them now because it makes me too sad. And that it's just not working for her. That system doesn't work for her. And it obviously doesn't reflect the learning that's happening for him because he's still getting marked against these grade standards, which aren't reflecting that he is making growth and there is lots to celebrate about his learning.
So that's another thing that I suppose teachers can do within schools is advocate for those kinds of changes. They're very individual. You'd be saying, you'd be reporting back from a parent, you know what I mean? Hey, our systems aren't working. I wonder if we could try, I wonder if we just for my school, my class, we could trial a different, you know what I mean? You can kind of advocate from within. Thanks for sharing, Stacey. Any yes, Kim.
I'm just thinking, wouldn't it be lovely if there was more collaboration between mainstream schools and special schools? Because I hear you all talk about special schools. For me, I've never even been in one, so it might as well be Mars that you're talking about. And if we could, once we get off contract and we've got our ongoing position, you hold on to it tightly and you never get any room for movement. But if there was some sort of swapping that could happen over a 12-month period or even a couple of terms, like there'd be a lot to learn from each other. And even though I think, I do as best I can, there's plenty more to learn.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that one of the things that we need, I think I raised it with this group in the first workshop, the anxiety I hear in my role, so I train a lot of teachers and I do a lot of research in schools, and the anxiety I hear from teachers in mainstream schools, which is, I'm terrified of teaching a kid who uses an alternative device. I've never done it before. I'm terrified of not knowing what I'm doing. I have no idea how to do that. And I'm terrified that someone's going to ask me to be good at it tomorrow. It's not just alternative communication devices. It's all sorts of things. But those are the kinds of things that worry them. They've never done it before. And the things that I hear from teachers in special schools who are moving into mainstream, that they've never taught a whole class at grade level before. I feel like the more time we spend sharing the skill sets, not everybody has to be good at everything. In an inclusive single system, you will still have all kinds of specialists. Not everybody's doing the same job every day. Inclusion isn't every kid all the time in one classroom. There's still all sorts of, specialist supports that need to happen. But I think special schools have all sorts of expertise in interprofessional collaboration. It's very normal for speeches to work in a class or OTs to work in a classroom, for example. Whereas Chelsea, you were saying in your school, that's suddenly happening for the first time this year. So I feel like if you'd seen models of that working well before, that might have been really helpful for you. So yeah, I absolutely think that's a really an important point. It will demystify the skill sets people have, but also upskill people in those, we need both. Yes, Adrian.
So just to continue on with that, we actually have a Wodonga Federation of Schools, which enables our teachers to have a year at any school that they want to within the Wodonga area. We currently have a teacher from our special school at Belvoir at our school. We've had several teachers at our Belvoir special school. We're going to have another one next year as well. So we've actually already moved towards that here in Wodonga. It's been really, really beneficial.
How fabulous. Somebody needs to come and talk to you all and capture and bottle some of what you've learnt.
Yeah.
And just on that as well, sorry, putting my union hat on, we actually are entitled to take 12 months off and then be guaranteed our position back if we've got an ongoing contract. And many, many teachers do use that to go experience a different school so they can learn about different techniques. So if you're worried about losing your ongoing position, just know that you are protected under the agreement for that.
It's good to know. All right, let us move on. So, working through ethical dilemmas. So this chapter is a bit dated. I personally didn't feel that the ethical dilemmas that they were presenting us with were all that reflective of the current situation. Some of them were, but not all of them were. But I did like this bit. Simply knowing a great deal about the desirability of inclusive education in the abstract doesn't make it any easier to practice in your teaching, particularly when you are faced often with unsettling dilemmas. So I'm taking that as my starting point. So this chapter talked about there being 3 basic approaches to developing teachers' abilities to untangle complex and interwoven dilemmas. There was the rules and principles approach, the character and structure approach, and the beliefs and ideals approach. And I've sort of briefly summarised them for you here. I'm working on the presumption that you've read the reading. I'm going to recap them here and then we're going to apply them. So Burke and O'Neill argued that the rules and principles approach gives you some language to help you make sense of moral situations that may be difficult. So if we use a principles approach, we get to draw on some language and concepts like respecting persons, avoiding harm, promoting good, treating people fairly. And they argued that this can help teachers to clarify what conflict or ethical issue there is that needs to be weighed up here. And they distinguish that only very slightly from a rules approach, because in a rules approach, there's a decision you've got to make regardless of the consequences. There's a rule that must be applied. And it helps you to consider the consequences of the various courses of action open to you. When there's rules, they operate like gates. You know, you go through the gate. You know what I mean? What happens when I go through the gate? So when we're using principles or rules, Burke and O'Neill argue that teachers can be very systematic in their decision making. There is a system for you to use. But then they said there's also the character and structure approach. Now, the character and structure approach enables a teacher to reflect on what kind of person, what moral person, or what inclusive educator are you striving to become? And this will give you, instead of using a sort of external system of rules, you use your subjective intuition. You might be drawing on memories of previous experiences or cases that you're aware of, and your emotional response to this. It gives you the agency, moral agency, to explore what it is that you're attempting to do. In the beliefs and ideals approach, they argue that this calls for exploring your foundational moral beliefs that you believe as a human being. So not who you're trying to become, but what you believe here and now today, and where you got those beliefs from. And the extent to which some moral beliefs might take precedence over others. And you may also be drawing on the evidence that you're using to support your beliefs. Okay, so 3 approaches. So before we go on, let's just stop and talk about those ethical approaches. Oh, there's a comment. Oh, sorry, it's just an unread comment from a long time ago. Any responses to those 3 approaches that were raised in that chapter? What do people think of those? Did they resonate with you? Leave you asking questions? Leave you absolutely cold with nothing to say? Stacey.
I think some of these dilemmas, I always want there to be a clear-cut answer, like this is what we do in this situation. And I've always worked under bosses who are very like, this is what we do in this situation, and it's very clear cut. We don't have our own kind of feelings about it. It's more like this is what the rules say. But this year, at the start of the year, we were dealing with a child who has very complex needs in prep, and my boss found out that the intention of the meeting was to go in with the parents and say, perhaps this isn't the right place. And she said that she wouldn't attend the meeting because she didn't feel like ethically that would be something that was okay to say. Once you've accepted an enrollment, then we need to do everything we can to support this student. And I'm not sure that the leadership at my school had heard someone about kind of come back at them like that before. And of course the meeting didn't happen because they kind of sat back and went, yeah, maybe we can't. But yeah, it sits uncomfortably with me when there's not like a, this is what we do in this situation kind of thing, especially when it's an ethical dilemma, I think.
Yeah, I think that you're referring then to which kind of approach would you call that? Your preference is for which kind?
My preference is for the first one. I can't remember what it was called. The one with the rules and
Rules.
Yeah.
Rules and principles approach.
In principle.
You prefer to work within one of those. You like a nice external structure to work within.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, because your colleague, who you've just told a really rather glowing story about,
Yes.
didn't work within the rules and principles approach. What did she use? Anyone want to have a crack? So she didn't say, well, here's how we apply the rules. What did she say?
I'm going to go beliefs and ideals approach.
I think I would agree. Tell me why you think that, Kim.
Well, she obviously had a belief about that everybody should be entitled to enrol, and she stood up for what she thought was right.
I still think she leveraged off the rules. She said, well, actually the rules, that's not okay. And the rules, it's actually against the rules. But she did both. I morally object. I'm not going to this meeting.
And she was new in the role, and it was her position as head of learning strategies in the school. And so she didn't want to, I suppose, start out by saying, oh, this is okay in this situation. And so she said, no, that's not how that's going to happen. So
I think that's very brave of her. Anyone else been in a situation where you yourself or someone at work has said, no, not doing that? Robert?
No, I'm nowhere near as brave as your colleague. I have a dilemma, a regular ethical dilemma at work when the school says to a parent in a meeting as part of a staged response, because my program is voluntary. But they'll say, if you keep coming to mainstream, you're going to you're not yet ready, and thus you'll engage in these behaviors, and as part of the stage response, you'll be expelled. If this continues, your best option is to go to Elevate. And then that can sometimes morph into you're not allowed on mainstream for recess and lunch because we're worried that you're going to commit an aggressive or violent behavior. And
who's they? Who's doing this saying?
My principal team. Who part of my role is to act as an internal lens for inclusive practice. So part of my role is they do expect me to say, is this inclusive practice? How are we justifying this response? So through a principles, but more importantly through a rules-based approach. And that's
I've handed you a big responsibility then.
Yeah.
You're the inclusion yardstick.
Part of my role is particularly through the school improvement team. It's less of a yardstick and more of a lens some days, if that makes sense.
Do you get the opportunity to do that, Robert, before the parents are there in front of you? Because I think it's
yes, yeah. We definitely have a pre-game meeting. It's not appropriate to have those discussions, and we can't have a robust discussion that we need to have while student or parent facing. It's much better to get on the same team before the meeting than during.
I feel like I need to process everything you've told me. So your school asks you whether it's appropriate to recommend a placement for a student.
No. What'll happen is we get our referrals through the inclusion panel, and
Who's on the inclusion panel?
The inclusion panel is myself, the head of the program for students with disabilities, the assistant principals.
And this is at a local school?
Yeah, at a government school, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we identify kids at risk and we make sure they don't slip through the cracks. And one of the pathways is if it's appropriate for a referral to my program. And 18 out of 20 of my students are there because it's definitely the right fit for them, and they want the support that I offer, and they know that my role is to get them to being comfortable and happy with the rest of the school and to get their teachers comfortable and happy teaching them. But I've got 2 students who they had choice but no options, if that makes sense. They are actually.
It doesn't. Explain.
So they're on a staged response. So they have had several suspensions, which is a totally separate issue. But they are at a stage now where the school is looking at what support options they can still offer the child, to say that they've done their I'm not going to say moral duty, I want to say their legal obligation through the department, that they have actually tried all steps.
And we all know what you mean by that.
And I want to sorry about that. I really want to believe that we would never ever push a kid out, because it's just not our college values.
I think MTSS would blow your school's mind, because if your setting were identified as a kind of tier 2 support, any child's accessing that would require an exit strategy in place upon arrival there.
Yeah. And we have, as part of the initial SSG, when a kid enters our space, we talk about what transition back to mainstream looks like, but it's not, it's certainly, that road's not always clear cut right at the beginning.
No, I suppose, anyway, I look forward to working with you over the next 2 years. I reckon that MTSS will address some of the issues that I can hear lingering concerns in your voice about. So when a student accesses, I talked about this a little bit in that reading, the MTSS reading from, what was it, week 2, I think. A student is never considered to be a tier 2 student, an elevate student, if you like. They're just a student. But it's been determined through, good, robust database decision-making that they need what's on offer currently through Elevate. And here's the data to show it. And here's what happens at Elevate that's evidence-based and known to address that need. And here's what data we're aiming for to get them back. Do you know what I mean? So there's an entry criteria, an evidence-based support strategy, and an exit criteria. I reckon that would be something worth looking at.
We have 2 out of 3 of those. It's the third one which we're a bit more nebulous on.
And the second thing has to lead to the third thing, if you know what I mean. Anyway, so very interesting, very interesting. All right, so the reading from Pode et al. Is a fairly confronting read. They talked about just how common some of these ethical issues in inclusive education are. They focus, Shirley Pode in particular is an expert in behaviour. So this article focuses in particular on behaviour. So it doesn't extend to things like academic support. But they looked in particular at restrictive behaviour management practices, which can occur as enacted or felt stigma, gatekeeping, such as enrolment rejection or discouragement, limitations on attendance, and it can include restrictive interventions like restraint and seclusion. And they defined restraint, oh, look at that, I've got a non-closed bracket. Restraint could be chemical restraint, physical restraint, mechanical restraint, holding a kid. It could be through the use of a therapeutic device or some kind of protective action. They define seclusion as confining students who would then be locked into a room or placed in a room or a location with a blocked doorway or some kind of enclosed space with fencing. Did anyone have any questions or comments just on the definitional stuff at the beginning there? No? All right. Is that too tiny for you to read? Okay, let me see if I can. No, I can't do that. Hang on, I've got another way I can do that. Let me attempt this way. And then oops. Sorry, driving Zoom some days gives you so many options that. Okay, now I think I've got a magnifying glass if I go through this way. Is that better? Okay, so some examples could be, like we said, refusal to enrol or discouragement to enrol or encouragement to enrol elsewhere, or simply being advised that student will do better, like Stacey's example. It sounds a little bit like a sentence that may go, we're not sure we're the right place for you. It may be an offer of only a part-time enrolment. It may come in the form of a request that families supplement resources. For example, we want you to pay for the aid. It could be saying, oh, we're just not sure they'll be able to keep up. It could be putting students for extended periods of the school day in places that are outside the classroom. It could be providing them with some kind of teaching or work that's undertaken separate from their peers. It could be putting them at a separate desk in the corner, or parking them with a teaching assistant constantly, like you may have seen in the Are You Ready to Include Me video. It could be simply providing inadequate educational support or teaching assistant support, or it may be inadequate attention from the teacher. For example, it might be placing the responsibility to teach a student onto a teaching assistant who is clearly not as qualified as you all are. It could be giving them lesson material that is substantially different to that the rest of the class is doing. So while the rest of the class are studying, I don't know, a novel at year 7, that child's still reading the Very Hungry Caterpillar in the corner with the aid. Regularly being excluded from broader school activities like camps and choirs, using restrictive practices, regularly suspending for apparently minor reasons, or having the child sent home. In South Australia, they call them take-homes. Are they familiar to people? Is anyone seeing things there? Yep, I've seen that. I have seen that. I am familiar with that. Anyone not? Anyone leading a charmed life where they genuinely see none of this? Because I was going to say we all want to come and work there. Yes, Michelle.
I guess I'm the only one who has never seen any of this because I've never worked in a special education setting or a mainstream school setting that accepts students with special needs. The only time I can relate to any of this was probably when I myself was in high school, and I have a classmate with cerebral palsy, I believe.
Yep.
But he was able to just to follow the lessons as the rest of us. So yeah, I've never seen any of this, fortunately.
I'm interested to know, Michelle, so do you work for an organisation that is an NDIS provider?
Sorry?
Do you know if your organisation provides services funded by the National Disability Insurance Scheme?
Oh, yeah.
So do you ever get to attend? So you work with young school-aged clients, is that correct?
Yep.
Are you ever granted access to the school property or invited to the school individual planning meetings for students?
No.
Or are you ever denied access to?
No, I never been invited, nor that I've ever denied access to.
Okay. The reason I ask is that I've had several requests over the last few years from allied health providers to come and do PD about collaborating with schools, and they are finding it particularly challenging to get access to schools. Schools are entitled to say no thank you to NDIS providers because they are essentially a private business provider, and you can say no to private business providers coming on ground and providing businesses or even being there. And some schools are very welcoming and accepting and other schools are not. Is anyone working in a school where they're regularly invited in? That is good to know. Anyone want to share?
Yeah, I think we have probably at least 2 or 3 a day for our students, a range of students. I mean, we welcome anyone that can come in and support the students and guide the teaching staff as well.
That's great to hear. Anyone else? Yes, Adrian?
Yeah, we're in a similar situation. So we have approximately 1 out of 5 students that have PSDMS funding. So we often have a revolving door with OTs, speech therapists, physios, occupational therapists, behavioral therapists coming in and out all the time. We also try to implement some of their ideas and strategies that might actually support some of the other students as well in the school, and just try to upskill our staff as much as possible.
It gladdens my heart.
Yeah, so because we find a lot of our students actually come from the independent schools that are kind of like being rejected. So some of the stuff that you've been saying there, how they were saying, oh, maybe this school's better, they just simply say,
Gatekeeping at its finest.
yeah, it's like, we can't support your child with a disability. So we basically have a policy where we're open for every student that wants to be learned, wants to teach, and we will teach them.
That's lovely to hear. Anybody else want to share about working with NDIS, Jess?
Yeah, so with the new DIP process, if you use we're currently using the NDIS and the allied health to help get evidence and put into our SSG goals, just because we haven't got the money to be able to outsource the OTs and that as well. So it's a really big, it's awesome. Same thing, we get to use the strategies across other kids in the school as well. And I think, yeah, it's invaluable.
Yeah. Some of the things that the organisation, the last one I did some work with, told me that a lot of schools say no thank you because the sheer number of students with disabilities, that they are finding an administrative burden on the school, and the schools are just feeling overwhelmed and saying, look, you know what, that's it, we're just saying no. Chelsea, you were kind of nodding about the administrative burden. Is that something you're seeing?
Yeah, particularly in prep. And then it was a concern about the number of bodies in the room and would that upset other students. And so we just got a blanket, no, we're having one OT and she will do as much as she can. And she's brilliant, but she's one person too. So it would be great to access some of the other people that our students are already accessing, who I now just have constant email conversations with to try and get as much touch base as we can.
You know what? I think that principals are good at reading data. Why don't you keep just a tiny log about how much time you're spending on email and say, I wonder if my time could be better spent here.
That's okay.
I think if you took them some hard data and said, this might be a different way to work, let's try this.
Yeah.
Let's just try it for term 4. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those kids are going to go up next year and they will be in a grade 1 classroom next year. This isn't a year-long experiment your school's running.
Yeah.
So why don't you propose it as a term 4 trial and say, let's just go in curious and interested.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Okay, so those are the range of different kinds of gatekeeping and restrictive practices that were, sorry, I'm just trying not to, there we go, discussed in the PODE article. I thought I'd bring this one up. This is, let's watch a video together. Let me get my sharing settings back again. Which one was that one? I think it's this one. All right. This is an ABC News story from about 6 years ago, but I think it's worth watching and thinking about. It covers 2 separate cases and how a teacher responded when faced with those. And I've now navigated away. There you are. Okay, share and share, optimize for audio and video. Just make sure my sound's all the way up. Oh, sorry. Nope.
Karen Burgess has left her career behind.
Get your bags, everyone. All right, what did you guys do at school today? Jacinta, what did you do at school?
For now, she's a stay-at-home mother, but last year, Karen Burgess was manager of a day centre in outer Melbourne for people with autism who have high needs. Ms Burgess only stayed at Aspect Heatherton for 3 months because, she says, she was horrified at what she saw. The worst thing she saw was this lockable box. She called it the coffin.
I was told that the box was for putting clients in. The person who told me was the team leader. I said, how do you get the clients in the box? And he made a shoving, pushing motion as if he was mimicking pushing somebody in the box. This person is actively telling me that they are pushing people in boxes, and he doesn't seem to be at all remotely affected by the fact that he's doing this.
Ms Burgess dismantled the box and notified Aspect head office. The box was taken away and 2 staff removed, but she says it was only one of many disturbing incidents she witnessed.
Clients being grabbed by their wrists, clients being left in their urine, medication being shoved down people's throats, or then medication not being given. I saw yelling, screaming, clients locked outside. Sometimes they could have been locked outside all day and unattended. Clients being called and referred to as
She says she reported it all to Aspect, almost on a daily basis, but she did not feel that the complaints were being effectively dealt with.
My manager said all disability organisations, there is abuse. And if I can't handle the abuse, maybe I need to consider my position in the disability industry.
Karen Burgess went on sick leave. In July last year, she took her concerns outside the organisation and made a complaint to Victoria's Disability Services Commissioner, who immediately contacted Aspect.
About 57 minutes after that conversation, I was fired in an email.
She pursued Aspect for unfair dismissal. The organisation started negotiating a possible settlement. In its negotiations, Aspect's lawyers sent her a draft deed of release.
This is what they tried to get me to sign.
The deed required Karen Burgess to hand over records and emails to Aspect and to destroy all work emails in her personal account. This was despite the ongoing investigation by the Disability Services Commissioner.
I felt that they were trying to get me to get rid of evidence that would actually support my previous claims of abuse, which to me is extraordinary.
The unfair dismissal case was ultimately settled. The Disability Services Commissioner referred the case to police.
So this would have barred you from
participating
in a police investigation?
Right, yes. They wouldn't hear what I had to say.
Karen Burgess refused to sign the draft deed and went to the media about the box.
7:30 can now tell the full story of what Karen Burgess says she saw at Aspect Heatherton and what she experienced after she blew the whistle, because her case is one of 150 submissions to a Victorian parliamentary inquiry into autism. The committee's chair says that whistleblowers in the disability sector often face a culture of cover-up.
And a culture where whistleblowers were punished for reporting abuse. That's not acceptable anymore. This is abuse and it needs to be called out for what it is, and it needs to be addressed for what it is.
The culture of cover-up and the feeling that he would be targeted for calling out abuse led this former teacher not to report what he saw last year through official channels. He would only speak to us anonymously. What he saw was this: a teenager in his final year at the Merryang Special Developmental School, a tiny school for children with high needs, who spent the whole of Term 3 and several weeks of Term 4 slumped outside on a beanbag all day.
I don't know how you can call yourself a teacher if that's what you're doing with a kid every day.
The boy often became overwhelmed and was prone to aggressive outbursts. Sending him to the beanbag outside was first used as a method of dealing with his challenging behaviour. 730 filmed him there last October. The former teacher, who we'll call John, says he discovered the practice when he came back from long service leave several weeks earlier and spoke to other staff.
They had said that he'd been in the yard for the entirety of term 3. And I said, what do you mean for the entirety of term 3? They said he'd come in the morning and he would go outside and he would sit there for the 6 hours of the school day.
And what was he doing?
Nothing. Sleeping. Sometimes he would walk around the yard, but very rarely, mostly just sitting in the beanbag. He might have had an iPad at times.
Just to clarify, term 3, this is winter.
Term 3, that's winter, yeah.
John, who was on his third one-year contract, felt powerless to act. He left the school soon after and has quit teaching entirely out of disillusionment at what he saw. 730 tracked down the teenager's mother and showed her our footage.
How does it make you feel seeing your boy like that?
Just mortified. Yeah, it just shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't have happened. How many other kids has it happened to? How many will it happen to? And they just act like there's nothing wrong with it, like it's okay. It's not okay.
The school did not tell her that her son was constantly sitting outside. She only found out from a teacher, not John, and another aide during the last week of the school year.
And, you know, it was the talk of the school.
That's what the teacher told you, was
yeah,
the talk
it was
of
the
the
talk
school.
of the school that, you know, how could it happen?
Before she found out about it, the mother says she was called into the school and asked to sign a letter which stated that if her son chose not to participate in classes, that was his decision. At that point, she didn't really understand what she was signing up to.
It's dated the 5th of the 10th last year. Did you sign it on that date?
No, it was way after that. Closer to the end of school.
Late today, the Victorian Education Minister told 730 he has instructed his department to commission an independent review into this concerning case. The department told us that the teenager was accessing a quiet and calm space and was at all times in full view of staff.
As for Karen Burgess, she knows Aspect has written her off as a vexatious complainant. Victoria Police could not find sufficient evidence to charge anyone in relation to the wooden box. Aspect's CEO declined an interview, but told 730 Miss Burgess's complaints were old news, and 5 independent external investigations had cleared Aspect of wrongdoing. But last week, the Disability Services Commissioner wrote to Karen Burgess advising that he has recommenced his investigation into her complaint.
At the end of the day, when I'm 85 years old and looking back on my life, I know and I can be proud of the fact that I stood up in this moment.
Okay. So what approach, let's go back to the Burke and O'Neill article. When I'm 85 and I look back on this moment, I can be proud of it. What approach did she use? Do you want me to bring those back up, the 3 from Burke and O'Neill?
It's a character-based approach. She is looking to reflect on the person that she wants to be.
Absolutely. She definitely is.
But I wonder if that situation, she's also combining it with a systems-based, a rules-based approach, or at very least a principles-based approach as a whistleblower, because she clearly recognised that it wasn't a systemic issue; it was a local. It was a very specific issue to that context that they were actually in breach.
I think you're right. When I chose this one for discussion tonight, because it's pretty dated, but it was useful because there was a video. That I don't know if any of you remember that case. It was pretty awful. The children attending that kindergarten were actually collecting egg cartons so they could soundproof the box. And they painted the box. There were a number of rules that she was like flat out, that's, you know, seclusion and it's not allowed and we're not doing it. but she also went, I can't let this one go. Do you know what I mean? She was confronted by a range of things. I would hate any of you to think that this is a special or mainstream issue that we're discussing here. So I've put up a second case, which isn't a video, which is, you may remember these images. Do any of you remember these images in the media? This was a primary school in Canberra that used pool fencing to build a cage for a student. Let me get my little annotating pen. So over there, that doorway you can see there is the doorway to the classroom. And this bit here is what it looked like from the front, from the classroom looking at the cage. And this laminated picture was apparently stuck in the staff room, showing the child asleep on the floor in there to try to justify its use as a calm down sanctuary. But to call these a calm down space and to call these a sanctuary is, well, Kim, you're shaking your head, tell me.
It absolutely makes me want to cry. I can't believe that you wouldn't put a dog in a cage like that. That's horrible. Yes, I do understand there are kids that need calm down spaces. I have one in my room, doesn't look like that. And it's a choice space where they go, but being pushed into something like that is just abhorrent.
And I've put a number of more recent examples from the Royal Commission. They're extended videos, and I do, I've put them there with a content warning that they are distressing. I've watched them all and I cried in every single one of them. So they are not for the faint-hearted. These speak to the systemic issues that we face in pledging to educate many kids for whom sometimes classrooms and learning can be absolutely overwhelming. And what we know in Chelsea, you'll probably see this in your classroom. Bronwyn, I'm sure you see some of these kids in your classroom. But locking kids in a room isn't for their own protection. It is not. It is what we do when we've run out of options. It is a sign that the options have been exhausted. And so, it's incumbent on us as a system to do this better. In the case of Karen Burgess and in the case of the principal who built the school, the pool fencing, both were fired and both were treated as isolated cases. In both instances, what I've just described as, I believe, a systemic issue, we don't have the right systems in place for these kids, has been placed, the burden of the decision has been placed on an individual who's lost their job over it. I felt uncomfortable hearing that woodwork teacher saying, how can these people call themselves teachers? Because it wasn't one teacher that did that. Somebody signed off on the budget, somebody approved it, do you know what I mean? So I feel uncomfortable laying this at any single person's feet. I do agree with you, Kim. I wouldn't, do it.
I think they might mean one scapegoat, not one teacher.
Somebody, I can't remember who, but somebody put up a terrific Moodle post where, I know who it was Steph. It wasn't on Moodle, it's on the Padlet that I've put for this week, where she said, I think that people are justifying something being in the best interests of a child when it's in the best interests of the school. And, I think the department has certainly made very clear when, they haven't said you can never, ever, ever use a restrictive practice. They have given very, very narrow parameters around when you can. Does anybody know them? Bronwyn, why did I know that you would have been well trained in them? Please share.
So you can use a restrictive practice if there is immediate and significant harm that might be done to the child or a staff member or another child, and you can only use the least restrictive action at that time for the least amount of time applicable, and you cannot write it into a behaviour support plan.
For those of you who've watched the Royal Commission, Bronwyn, you might be shocked to hear that they are routinely written into individual plans.
I'm not shocked to hear that. I've had to take them out of a lot of our plans.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for your good work. In fact, the New South Wales Department was raked over the coals, and ultimately a department member was axed over having not only approved it initially, but denied a parent's appeal. And they are currently fighting to be able to continue to use restrictive practices as components of IEPs. So when I say this isn't an individual teacher problem, this is a system problem, this is genuinely a system problem. When a child has reached the point of being that overwhelmed that they've picked up a stick and broken a window or shoved someone's head through it, or, you know, assaulted the aide, that's, you know what I mean, whatever they've done, it's very rarely unexpected. It's very rarely untriggered, and it's very rarely uncharacteristic for the child. This is usually a child who may often, far too often, it stems to communication, that children haven't got a robust communication system in place, and they're unable to tell you, I'm sore, I'm scared, I'm hungry, I need the toilet, whatever basic, you know. Bronwyn, have you got good communication systems in place for every kid in your school? Are there kids that still don't have those?
Yeah, there are. One of our goals is to become, to have a communication system for every single student. There are a number of hurdles with that, but we do provide every student with access to a communication system, being visuals and, you know, that sort of stuff, whether that's, some of it's not specific to the child. Some children do have specific, you know, more technology-based communication systems. But we do give every child access to at least, you know, a core board and visuals and things like that. There are other problems that I could talk for hours about getting that across to every single child, but we try.
Yeah. So I often visit schools where the kids' communication device is in the cupboard because it's fragile and needs to be protected. Or, oh no, we don't take those outside at play lunch. Or, do you know what I mean? There are often even poor practices used around communication devices.
Yep, or it gets thrown at my head, so I'm not getting it out.
Or it's been used as a weapon. So it's not just about having a communication device, it's about a kid being able to use it and communicate it. And Bronwyn, I'm sure you'll agree that invariably behaviours are communication related. Kids who are unable to access their device, it hasn't been, you know, they haven't yet acquired the use of it. One of the most heartbreaking, no, they're all heartbreaking. One of the cases that made me cry the hardest at the Royal Commission was the case of Ryan. I've put his dad's testimony up. No communication system was in place for this boy. He graduated from school with no communication system, no literacy and no numeracy skills. And he now lives his adult life chemically restrained for most of the hours of the day. It's utterly heartbreaking. But in my time teaching, I worked with 3 kids who used alternative communication devices, but none of them in the same class at the same time. We need far better upskilling in this area. Bronwyn, do you see a de-escalation of violence and aggression in the classroom when kids are able to communicate?
Yes, I'm hesitant because generally the violence and aggression happens outside the classroom, so we don't see the de-escalation in the classroom.
Right.
But yes, definitely, if they can communicate, and it might not necessarily be in that moment, but over time, we will see less behavioural incidents when they can communicate their feelings. So it might not be, you know, when they're heightened, give them a communication device and they come back down. It's more like he's only heightened 2 times this week instead of 17 last week, because now he can tell us what's happening.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Yes,
because
it does.
When they're heightened, they can't communicate whether they've got a device or not.
And that's where I said before, it's about understanding what the triggers are. You know, this kid can't stand the school bell. That sound sends them completely, you know, over the edge. So, well, the kid can't change, so the bell's got to change. Do you know what I mean? It's about understanding how the environment around a kid creates a behaviour. Not, you know, we cannot change kids, but getting teachers trained in the use of prone restraint, having kids sedated, all of these are things that people do when they have no idea how to do it better. And it's incumbent on us as a system to know how to do it better. So one of the things that I'm doing in the course of rewriting this unit is putting more in about AAC. And I'm trying very hard to get a fabulous speechy who I know to be far too busy, but to try to share some time. She works across a lot of schools. I might share with you, she's got a fabulous video on cued articulation. Do any of you work in schools that use cued articulation? Kim, Suzanne? I'm just writing this down. Because in the short term, that's something else that you can add into your repertoire. So let's get back to the idea of how do we respond when we say, yes, Christy.
Sorry, can I just ask a question as putting it out there?
Yep.
So students with ADHD,
yep.
would medicating them then be considered a form of medical restraint?
No.
No, okay.
Michelle, did you want to add something there?
No, I was just going to say the same things that she just said. Yeah, that is not considered medical restraint because that's necessary.
And, you know, Shirley's article was really clear that you may have a child who's got a therapeutically recommended device that they use. And sometimes they might be using that in really legitimate ways, but sometimes schools may use them to restrain a child. There's been other well-known cases, for example, strapping children to chairs. It's around the use, the intended use. Some kids, for example, have amazing wheelchairs that they can be sort of strapped onto that can help them stand and develop some muscle tone in their legs. But to restrain a child in one of those is mechanical restraint. So it's using it beyond its intended purpose. As you can imagine, that is a huge grey area. And I note that the department in Victoria has been given a massive slap over the wrist around the poor reporting and transparency around restraint and seclusion. And I think it was 2016 that they promised to have a transparent reporting system in place. And TikTok, it's 2022, and they still haven't released that. So what do we do? Let me just go back to some of the findings. Gatekeeping, seclusion, restraint, restrictive practices are not rare. They do exist on a sliding scale. Just because you don't have a pool fence cage in your school doesn't mean that you do not have restraint or restrictive practices taking place at your school. And we've had a number of examples tonight that have been about things like, Robert, you've hinted that sometimes you're not always comfortable with the way students' choices are presented to them. A choice to go to Elevate may actually not be a free choice that they've made. Everyone's slides have moved around. It was Stacey, you were telling about the staff member who wasn't on board with the gatekeeping and saying this isn't the right school for this kid anymore. So these are also restrictive practices. They are restricting the access of a child to learning in an environment, whether that is saying you can't be there for the full day, whether that is saying you're not welcome here because we are worried about your keeping up, or however you spin it, restricting their access to learning is a restrictive practice. So it isn't rare. Over 70% of the families surveyed for the article that we read had experienced one or more of these. So they hadn't most of them had experienced multiple forms of these. The practices were common across sectors, Catholic, government and independent schools. The practices were not significantly different across states, school size, year level, geographic placement, or type of disability. And I'm just putting these back up there for you because I'm interested to know when you see it, how will you respond? And I want you to think through not only the three options of a rules approach, a character approach, or a beliefs approach, but also the immediate well-being of a child and the well-being of your own self. Those are 5 key considerations. I can see Chelsea go, ooh. Tell us, Chelsea, what are you thinking?
This was my day today.
Okay, tell us about your day today.
I've got a little cherub in my class. He's stunning, absolutely stunning. Mum and Dad are beautiful and are relying on the school with English as a second language to provide them with as much information about their child as possible. Today, I was confronted with leadership saying to me, but what are we going to do with him? He can't go to grade 1. What are we going to do with him? But he's made so much growth and he will continue to make so much growth. And so it was put out that, do we have a meeting with mum and dad and see if they want to go visit as an alternative setting? And it took everything in me to say, well, how about I just go, see what I can learn and bring it back? And they were like,
well done,
let's
you.
go with you. And I was like, I'll go first. And I was like, that's the first step I could put, to just put any sort of fence between him and being able to go somewhere else, because I just think he's making so much growth with the other kids. So I'm going to 2 special settings tomorrow to go see what I can find out. But
I am so curious.
I had this dilemma. What do I do?
I have a question. Why can't he go into grade 1?
The grade 1 teachers won't know what to do with him.
But neither did you before the beginning of the year.
No.
And so that's what good transition notes and professional coaching. And so why don't you start planning for that transition now?
Yeah.
Where you invite them to join you and the school provides them with time release. Bronwyn, can I ask, when you get new graduates in your school, is that something that you put in place? Do you get them to join the classrooms of the Yodas and the, you know, the wise owls of the profession and say?
In theory, yes.
Oh, that sounds nice.
In reality, we have such a staff shortage that no, we can't even free up. But yes, that comes up every. We even spoke about it this morning in our SIT meeting about how we do induction and how can people, even existing staff, learn things from other staff if they don't have the time to actually go and spend just watching and not being involved, and you know, those sorts of things. So every new grad gets a mentor, or new staff member, sorry, gets a mentor, but most of the time, though, they meet with them after, like during non-teaching times. Yeah, so in an ideal world, yes, you know, we would absolutely give new staff time and even existing staff time to, you know, go into another class and see how they do things. But in reality, it's just down to
the
staffing
workforce.
and money.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So Chelsea, I think you probably need to go to a school that's really well known for having a robust and mature PBS system in place. And I can think of 2 schools that I've personally clapped eyes on, but they're not the only 2. One of them is Frankston SDS.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is, oh, hang on, it's just gone. Hang on. I can remember
because I feel like teachers are scared.
Aitken Creek Primary School. It is nowhere near you. I hope you like driving. Hang on, let me just put that in the chat. Aitken Creek Primary School and Frankston SDS have a really good PBS. They've been doing PBS for years. They've got good staff induction. They have a no hands-on kids policy. Anyone got any other suggestions for Chelsea?
Where are you, Chelsea?
Southeast Melbourne.
You could come and visit my school.
Yeah, I'd love to.
I'll send you an email later.
That sounds good. Thank you.
So Chelsea, are you going, so you have not adopted the rules approach yet?
No.
What would the rules approach be in this situation? Anyone, what would a rules approach? The school are saying, is it time? We can't let this kid grow up to grade 1. Let's have a meeting with parents and gently introduce the idea of a special school. Robert, what's the rules approach?
So there's 2 parts to the rule. The first is if they were trying to prevent them from going up, because the rules state that you can't prevent a child from going up without the explicit permission of the parent through an SSG. And then the second rules is that every child has the right to attend their local government school. That's really, really clearly enshrined, I think, or at least I think it is. That's what back when I was a undergrad, that's what got drilled into us at the inclusion unit that I did. Yeah.
So you're correct. The Disability Discrimination Act says every child is allowed to enrol in their local school. Yes, Kim, you're correct. You can't refuse an enrolment. However, a parent needs to know that, and they need to be ready to lawyer up. And they need to be ready to go through this step of the process, and then this step of the process, and then this step of the process, and it's exhausting. I would get emails every week from parents saying, can you help? And I'm not an advocate. Aside from the fact that I don't have the skill set, it jeopardizes my job to do what I do, to do that instead. So I point them to places like All Means All, and, you know, Association for Children with Disability, and do you know what I mean? All the places where they can go and get an advocate. But while it is not legal for schools to say, let's have the meeting where we say this may not be the right place for them, as you've just read in this article, it's not legal, but there's no police person hanging at the school gate that you can pull in to help you here. Robert.
Please shut this down if it's not the right place. I think it's the right place. If anyone else, have you found that disability advocates are demonized in your contexts? So I've worked at 2 different schools where a particular disability advocate, who I don't think I should name, who's well known within the department apparently.
Is she well known and redheaded?
First name starts with a J? Yes,
that's the one.
So if it's inappropriate for me to ask, I'd love to hear your thoughts, if anyone here. Is it right or wrong that should these people be being demonized the way that they are within school contexts, or are they just on the other side of the other side of the ledger, where they're trying to help kids with, you know, access education? But I don't want to name names because that sort of crosses a line, given this is recorded.
Can I jump in there? So my experience with disability advocates is, like you've just said, that they are advocating for the child with a disability. From the school's point of view, often the things that they are expecting are impossible for us to do. There's no kind of education lens on what they're asking, and there's also no consideration of the rest of the school community. So it's all about that one particular child, which is great. It's great that that kid has an advocate, but what about the rest of the school and how the things that they want to happen for that child are affecting the whole school community? Does that make sense?
It's
That's
interesting.
been my experience.
I was just going to jump in on that and say a number of years ago, the department tried to say that disability advocates couldn't talk in meetings anymore, which, you know, like as you said, Bronwyn, kids need someone in their corner. And you know what? I mean, those of you who are parents, you do have impossible demands for the world for your child. You want the world for your child. You also know that that's unreasonable and you can't have the world for your child. But you know what I mean? Every kid needs a champion in their corner who's going in with a classic negotiating technique of ask for the moon. Is it unreasonable for us to say they can't talk? Yes. Are they demonized? I suspect so. Is the one you're referring to in particular? Yes, absolutely. Yes, but every kid needs an advocate. And interestingly, in Victoria, we really do not have a good system of advocacy for families. New South Wales family advocacy. Anyone here in New South Wales? New South Wales has the most amazing system. Family advocacy in New South Wales. Look them up. They run conferences. They have fabulous online stuff on websites. They're incredible. So does that answer your question, Robert? I think they probably are unfairly demonized. I think the person you're talking about has gone. She also manages the Disability Discrimination Legal Service. And I think that what crosses her desk on a daily basis has probably sent her off, you know, into a pretty dark place. So Chelsea's shared one dilemma. Chelsea, go look at some schools. Make sure they are a mix of mainstream and special. If you only visit special schools, your school can then say, well, you know, we've seen some shining examples, and this is this kid's local school, and they are entitled to be there. So I think that having that as their premise, and having, as you said in your Moodle post, there's nowhere else for this kid to graduate to. This is his local community. These are his peers. How do we make this work? Suzanne, you were waving your hand, and then Bronwyn's waving her hand as well.
I was just going to say she can come to our school and have a look.
Thank you, Suzanne. Where's your school?
Bentley West Primary School. Bentley West Primary
School.
School.
Go to Bentley West.
Come to our school. All the kids are included. So, and have
Yeah.
been for years now. Yeah.
And that's not far, Chelsea. And that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Suzanne. Before I forget, I do want everybody to put in their calendars for Thursday, the 15th of September, that I'm going to be running a public event at Monash, and I'd love you to come if you're able. And the Vice Principal from Bentley West will be on my panel. Graham Innes will be chairing, for those of you that know Graham Innes. He was the first Disability Discrimination Commissioner, blind man with a dog, who's sometimes in the newspaper. I will share some stuff on Moodle. But absolutely, that's a great idea. Yes, Stacey, sorry, hang on, Stacey, Bronwyn was next.
Sorry, just going back to Chelsea's dilemma, if you do look at it on the rules, does this child qualify for a special needs, for a special development school?
Thank you for raising that.
Do you know their IQ, or do they have an ID? Like, what's their, they might not qualify.
Yeah, he's got an ID. Yeah, so he would qualify. But I
But
honestly
what's his
think
IQ?
55.
Okay, so yeah, he definitely would.
Yeah, but
So
I
don't go down that
genuinely
road.
think that the kids in my class have a higher sense of empathy with him around. And I think the way they speak to him in the playground has started to filter into other kids in the playground. And I don't know, I feel like, Kate, I can see it happening. And I'm like, this is why it works. And it's just, I don't know, it made me say in a meeting today when I'm not ongoing, hey, how about I go instead? And let's see what we can do to keep him here.
Oh, now I feel a little bit teary, Chelsea. That was very brave of you. Well done.
Thank you.
So we are your people. Bronwyn is your people. Suzanne is your people. Anyone else here? Are you her people? Where are we all? Okay, so Chelsea, we've got you back. Go and visit some schools. Make sure they include but are not limited to special schools. So you can say it's the practices. And I think that is an important point. Are there any practices that are implemented in any of these settings that cannot be implemented in your setting? And if so, we bring the support to the child. One of my favourite ever special school principals used to regularly field phone calls from her local school. And they'd call her up and they'd say, Gal, I got another one for you. And she'd say, tell me about that. And she'd say, oh, one of them's just hit one of my teachers. And she'd say, and would you like them to come and hit one of my teachers? Would you? And the point, they usually got pretty quiet. And then she would say, tell me what reasonable adjustments you have put in place for this person. And then they would say, I will get back to you. Because invariably they hadn't put sufficient or any in place. You know, children are not generally born violent. They usually cannot self-regulate for a range of reasons. And it's about putting in place the right supports and a sufficient intensity of teaching to enable them to do that. So that's what I would go looking for with an inquiring mind, Chelsea. Okay, yes, Kim.
Sorry, can I just say we have a little preppy here at our school. Can't invite you up, Chelsea, but I am your people. And he's an EAL boy and he has an IQ of 54. And we have just got Tier 3 DI funding for him. And he has a completely individualised program, lots of classroom modifications, and there's no inkling that he would go anywhere else. So don't let them, push him out. I can share plans, you know, and supplementary things and anything that you'd like that may help, but don't let them push him out.
And also for everybody's sake, as Chelsea said, that's good for everybody. All the kids in your class, Chelsea, are benefiting from high quality teaching and they are benefiting from having a fully inclusive classroom. So you're nailing it. Keep it going. Anybody else? As I said, these situations are not rare. I feel like here we go. Oh. These situations aren't rare. Is anyone else struggling with their school at the moment to be heard or to speak back, or can you give examples? You don't have to give it from your own school. They can be ones that you have witnessed. Yes, Stacey.
Mine's from a parent perspective, but just advocating for my daughter who has a medical condition, and it doesn't affect their day-to-day dealing with her in the classroom, but in an emergency situation it would affect it. And she's going swimming at the moment, her swimming program, and for the first time she's leaving the school without a parent. So generally we go on excursions just to support the teacher in terms of emergency medication and things like that. And her teacher was away on Friday, and so I just kind of rang the nurse and I said, what are we putting in place? And she said, her response was something like, I don't think of her because I don't need to kind of think about her all the time. She's not like front of mind. And I kind of stepped back and thought, but that's your whole job. Like, she's high needs and she's got this medical condition. And I would have thought she would have been one of the people who you considered. So from a parent perspective, the advocating kind of never stops, but you also want to have a really good relationship with them. So I think that it's a really interesting thing, the gatekeeping from the school's perspective, because if you fracture that relationship, it's really hard kind of to move forward. I find it interesting that parents would keep trying or challenge a place that said they didn't want your kid to be there. I would find that really confronting as a parent.
It's a really amazingly succinct way of putting it, Stacey. So some parents do battle on, and some parents say, why would I want my child in this hostile environment? Do any of you know the case of Scarlett Finney? Let me put the link in the chat. We've probably got a few minutes. We can look at this video.
They stated that taking on a student such as myself would have caused unjustifiable hardship for the school. They couldn't justify having to put in a very excessive amount of money towards building ramps, widening doorways, training their teachers, hiring more staff to look after me, and that they just could not justify doing that for what they thought would be only one student.
Scarlett Finney was 5 years old and excited to be going to school. Instead, she became the focus of a national debate about inclusive education. Scarlett wanted to go here to Hills Grammar. She called it the school in the bush. Her parents were astounded the application was turned down.
And just all of a sudden it just hit me that this is the sort of obstacles, that this is what her life is possibly going to face. The thought of going to school was definitely the most exciting thought that I'd ever had. And then he just said, we just don't feel that we can cater for Scarlett's disability. And we just don't think that we're going to be the right fit for her. And I said, but, you know, she hasn't even gone, the principal hasn't even met her. And, you know, I speak too quickly because I think I was just in shock for a moment.
They lodged a complaint with the Human Rights Commission and went through conciliation.
I was very passionate from the start that I wanted to definitely express that what they had done was not okay with me, and that I wanted to stop them or any other school from being able to prevent any other child from being able to go to the school if theirs and their parents' choice for any reason.
Conciliation was unsuccessful, and subsequent to that, the Human Rights Commission, with Graham Innes as hearing commissioner, heard the matter.
Commissioner Graham Innes found that the school had unlawfully discriminated.
The school hadn't really engaged properly with Scarlett and her family to determine her particular needs, and that they'd made too many stereotypical assumptions about what a person with spina bifida might need going through their school life.
Hills Grammar pushed back, refusing to accept the ruling and appealed to the federal court.
Once again, surprisingly, I was shocked.
If we happen to lose and the school won, you know, we'd be up for costs and things like that, legal costs. So that was pretty scary.
And if there was going to be any financial amount of money awarded to them, we would have to pay that. It felt like quite a gamble.
A massive gamble, and at the centre of it all was a 5-year-old girl.
The risk of losing, that would have obviously had a big impact on her as well as the family, and as a vulnerable child, that would have been quite difficult, I think, to take on that risk.
Private details of Scarlett's condition were exposed both in the court and in the media.
We're putting our daughter into a situation where her whole medical condition is just going to be dissected.
Scarlett showed herself to be stronger than anyone could have imagined.
Hillsborough should admit their mistakes and that they were in the wrong. And it's interesting how this Hillsborough School motto is strive for excellence. Why don't they strive for tolerance and more understanding for people who have physical disabilities?
The Hillsborough School should be hanging their heads in shame as far as I'm concerned. They weren't just going up to the federal court arguing 2 or 3 points. They were going with like 14 points. And if they'd been successful on one, they could have won the whole thing. So we needed the federal court judge to come back and basically uphold Commissioner Innes's decision on all of those points. And he did. The federal court judge ruled that Commissioner Innes got it right.
This week in the federal court, she trounced the school, which refused to accept her as a student because she has spina bifida.
Scarlett, what would you like to say?
It makes me very happy that Commissioner Innes's decision still stands and has not been overturned.
It's really important to me that everyone gets to be fully integrated, because honestly, that is how you do learn. You learn from your peers as much as you do from your educators.
Scarlett's made a lasting difference. Hillsborough now leads the way, embracing children with disabilities like Julie Carlton, who has spina bifida.
My school is really good at making me feel included, and the teachers are amazing. They don't treat me any different. If I do need that extra help, they do give it to me. I love it when that happens.
The education system in Australia is by no means perfect, and there is still much discrimination experienced by people with disability in education. But I guess what Scarlett's case did was say to schools, you can't say no to a person on the basis of their disability. And so it was the starting point for the education standards that have been developed under the Disability Discrimination Act, which set out some of the principles on which people with a disability should be able to participate in the education system.
I'd do it 100 times again if it meant that it only helped one student.
So importantly, from that video, I'm sorry, I realised I didn't probably share the audio. Could you hear it okay? Okay. Stacey, in the end, her parents didn't send her there.
I don't think I could have either. Like, I think it's a worthwhile fight to have, and it was a necessary fight for them to change their views. But I would always feel like that the relationship was too broken, and I wouldn't have been able to either.
But, you know, they probably looked at their choices and none of them may have been good choices. It may have been a fight worth, do you know what I mean? I know many parents, I've recommended you all join Sign. I'm also on the parent group called SIPN, and I'm often there. I'm like a Facebook stalker. I lurk in groups to understand the chatter. I'm in Prep Teachers Australia to listen to what's hard for teaching prep at the moment. I'm in a group called Ask Me. I'm an AAC user because I'm there to listen. What's hard? What aren't teachers getting right? What do I need to take back into my teaching? And I'm also in SIPN, and I listen to what parents are experiencing in schools. And we need to consider their perspectives. And Bronwyn, I think you put it really nicely. You know, you want the advocates there. They may not always be asking for what's reasonable, but they absolutely should be there and they should be talking. And parents have to end up making choices in a very constrained set of circumstances. None of the options may be good. You know, their local school may not have been a good choice. Their local special school may not have been a good choice. This local private school was equally a hostile place to their kid. You know, so where do you go? People don't always have great choices. So we have to make the systems we work in the best they can be and advocate from within. We can't change it tomorrow. Now I'm aware of the time, and I did want to leave some time for asking assignment questions. I realise that it's late, but I am going to bring this up quickly. That was wrong sharing settings. Let me try that again. And then that. Assignment questions. Ask me anything.
Not so much of a question, but more of a comment. We had a bit of a study session last Saturday with a few of you. Thanks for rocking up. And we all said that if we could have something together, even if it's not finished, that we wanted feedback on by this Saturday, that we'd exchange papers and give peer feedback. Even if you weren't there last Saturday, please send me an email. I'll put my email in the chat, because if you want to get in on that this Saturday, we're basically having the opportunity to trade papers and get peer feedback.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for facilitating that. Everybody, I've put Robert's email into the Moodle announcements. Strongly recommend you avail yourselves of peer support groups. Do you want to put your email in the chat again, Robert, just for the ease of the people?
Already have.
Oh, thank you. For those of you watching the video later, Robert's email is in the Q&A session recording announcement email that I sent out to everybody. Any questions about the assignment? Oh, Suzanne, you were just like, oh my God, assignment. Are you okay? Anyone? Jennifer, I'm mindful that I haven't thrown the talking stick to you tonight because I know you've had a rough day. Any questions? Okay. All right, well, bang on 7. Oh, Stacey.
Sorry, I thought I may as well ask. In that first discussion point where you're looking at concepts of inclusion in comparison to special education or something like that, can you look at concepts? Yeah, it was conceptions. Sorry, I didn't say that correctly. But can you look at conception concepts that, I'm not going to say it right, concepts that maybe promote a segregated setting rather than an inclusive setting? So when you're looking at ableism, you're looking at it as a concept that would promote a segregated setting rather than an inclusive setting. And then you might look at, what was something else that I was looking at?
It will probably come down to, in your discussion point, yes. If you're talking about writing an extended point on that,
yes.
You know, if you're dealing with ableism and the idea that this kid can't go to their local school, they're too disabled. Do you know what I mean? That's an ableist assumption, for example.
Yes.
So, you know, if you're looking at it as drivers of thinking or medical models, children with disabilities mean very specific instruction that can't possibly be done. Do you know what I mean? Those kinds of things, absolutely. So yes, have I answered your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I was on the right track, that kind of you narrowed down the concept, or do you just leave it as broad as what it is?
No, I would think if you're doing your extended response on this, you'll absolutely need to drill down, and some of those other models of disability, ableism, all of those kinds of things will come in. Somebody, I can't think who, asked Kelly, I think it was, asked last week if they could be how many, you know, and I said, well, you've got to have a balance between if you go with too few, you haven't really given it enough breadth. But if you have too many, you've got too much breadth. You know, it's a mile wide and an inch deep. So you might need to think about your word allocation. How many can you do that you'll do justice to?
But can you look at the concepts, not just because I think the initial discussion point was looking at concept like what is an inclusive education, what is a segregated education? Can you kind of do more of a comparison?
You could, but that would definitely, I'm just trying to get out of this so I can go to, oh, come on, screen, play ball. I've got too many windows in front of me. 5632, discussion point 1 is, I think it was something like what was discussion point 1. I have to move your faces over. Concepts of inclusive education.
Different to special education.
Yeah, but then read on. Please outline how they are different by drawing on the fundamental concepts outlined in the readings. So that's where your fundamental concepts come in. So not just the concepts of what are these things defined as, but what are the fundamental concepts that underpin them. So models of disability, I've got my textbook here. So you'll be thinking about chapter 2, in particular, chapters 1 and 2, but chapter 2 has models of disability, it's got equity versus equality, it's got the dilemma of difference, inclusive language. So those are the kinds of things that I think you're probably going to be turning to.
Thanks.
Hey, Kate, on
Yes.
that, so doing independent research, if you discover, say, other areas that would be fundamental concepts, and you've gone into those, is that okay even if they're not in that book? So for
Absolutely.
example,
Oh yeah, I don't want you to be limited by the book. Textbooks are always there as a kind of starting point.
yeah. So like I was just a bit concerned because we're looking at gatekeeping this week, and I've really looked at what gatekeeping is in a school setting as a fundamental concept to the segregation of students in mainstream settings. Would that be okay as a fundamental concept, or would I have to go back to the other ones like ableism and things like that?
I suspect you'd probably end up talking about gatekeeping as a kind of consequence of ableism.
Yeah.
They can't keep up. They don't belong here. We don't have the resources to support, you know, or like Chelsea said, our teachers just won't know how to do it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
You're getting
for sure.
yourself off the hook. That also, it really means that all sounds like a lot of work for us.
Yeah.
You know, that we've never done before. So we think we'd be better off just bumping this kid to someone who's done this work before.
Yeah, for sure.
So if I were you, I'd do them as a logical consequence, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Question, someone had Michelle, you put your hand up. Yes.
I guess I just want to ask whether so for this assessment, it's important to use peer-reviewed journals and
yes.
Are we able to use one of our second week's reading, that is the multi-tiered system?
You emailed me earlier, and I've been in and out of meetings all day, and I was going to email you back and say, can you please put this on the forum? I want everyone to have the answer to this question. Perfect. Thank you for reminding me. So if you want to use a reading that's not peer-reviewed literature, but it's the perfect reading to support your point, for example, it might be how something's defined, or it might be about history or human rights or something like that, then you might be citing a policy document, or you might be going here for some of that definitional stuff. That is fine. Peer-reviewed literature is a requirement for any claim about evidence. So if you're saying evidence shows that this is a better approach, or evidence shows, do you know what I mean? Then you must be citing the evidence itself. And as a person who writes in textbooks, I can tell you that although I am drawing on evidence, it hasn't been through the peer review process in the same way as a journal article has. Okay. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
You can use it for particular purposes, like history, human rights, policy stuff, but evidence, claims about evidence must draw on peer-reviewed literature.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? You all look so tired. All right, I feel like that was enough wait time. Okay, everyone, take a breath. You've all had a big day. You're a bunch of legends. I love the way you formed little communities around Chelsea and around the assignment. And, you know, that's what it's all about. It's about doing it together. Takes a village, as they say. So please go have some dinner or a cup of tea or whatever it is that you need at this point. And I will share the recording soon. Keep the questions coming on Moodle about the assignment. And thanks for joining me this evening.
Thanks, Kate.
See ya.
Bye.